Everyone, welcome to the Endgame Podcast Season 2, where I bet you didn't know what you didn't know. I'm Dr. Ryan Wakeham, successful entrepreneur and your Endgame coach. Sit back, relax, and tune into today's episode, Top 5 Habits to Boost Your Emotional Intelligence. I want to thank everyone for joining today as we talk about another really important topic as it relates to your success as an entrepreneur and your success at home, right? Again, many of the things we talk about on this podcast are relevant not just for your professional life, but also for your personal life. Today, we're going to talk about how you can boost your emotional intelligence or your EQ. We did talk about this once in the past, but it's such an important topic. I wanted to go a little bit deeper in terms of not just what is EQ, because that's really what we talked about last time, but how do you really boost it, or how do you really promote it, or how do you really fine tune it and hone it in? How do you enhance it, right? So as we think about your EQ, your emotional intelligence, how can you enhance your emotional intelligence? And again, that could be critically important both in your business life and your personal life. So just to go back to what we talked about last time, defining EQ, really EQ has multiple components. There's a component of your ability to self-regulate. There's a component of your ability to be self-aware. There's a motivational component to this, and there's an empathetic component. And finally, there's a social skills component. And we're going to talk about kind of each of those components and how you might enhance those components of your own EQ on the move forward. One of the things we know is as we think about just who become great leaders, who really foster great followership, who can navigate difficult situations, or kind of knows when to speak, knows when not to speak, tend to be, those not just with high IQ, but tend to really, if you were to think about an organization and some of the most successful folks in that organization, those folks tend to have a real stronghold on enhancing their own EQ. So EQ really can be very important, not just in terms of being successful at your role, but really the trajectory of your career pathing. And again, which you'll be kind of tasked to do. Those who are not just those who don't just have a kind of standard or above IQ, but those who have a really strong EQ combined with an IQ tend to be able to achieve successes that most cannot. Again, they tend to be put into management positions and they tend to become almost natural leaders within an organization. So honing or enhancing your EQ is really important if you think about your career path and how you might excel as whether that's a leader or a manager within a corporate organization, or whether that is your own small business and how you kind of gain culture and followership, or as you are in maybe a rapidly growing startup or business, how you can maintain a culture and quality leadership and communication despite the stresses of growth. So there's a few habits. Again, we'll kind of each of the components of EQ, we'll talk about some habits that might help enhance that. And so habit one is, as we think about communication, is this idea of reflexive or reflective listening. And I say reflective in so much as, a communication with reflective listening would be almost what we call a talk back or a teach back. So where you really take a moment before you even say what you're thinking, you take a moment to acknowledge what you heard from the other side of communication, right? Communication is two ways, and is not just two ways, it's two things. It is both the words spoken and the listening. And so if someone is speaking at you and you're not listening to them, then the chances that you're going to be perceived as having a high EQ or even be capable of having a high EQ in that setting would be very low, right? So reflective listening, would be some sort of talk back, teach back, just to validate what was said. And again, not just what was said, but what was heard. We have selective listening sometimes instead of reflective listening, which is we hear the things we want to hear. We hear the things that are kind of strike our brain in a way when we're tuned out, or our default mode network, getting the psychopathology of it, is overly dominant. So reflective listening shows that participant, the other side of the communication loop, that you are in fact engaged, that you are hearing them. And that will naturally help to build empathy and rapport. And again, really creates that communication skill set and the culture that great leaders are always striving to build. So, suggesting the use of reflective listening is one really great habit as we think about how you might enhance communication and empathy skills. We talked about it before too, but this idea of self-awareness or self-assessment is really important to EQ. So if you are quote unquote clueless about the world around you and you're just kind of walking through it in some sort of egotistical way, and you are only aware of kind of yourself and you're not thinking about kind of how you play a role in the broader picture, that can be problematic, but equally problematic is if you're just incapable of having your own self-awareness. So if you're incapable of kind of putting yourself in a position where you can understand, what's going on in a situation and how you play a role in that situation. So there's this idea of self-awareness and situational awareness, and then the ability to then take a step back after a given situation, or kind of in the middle of a situation, and be able to self-assess, right? So not only what's your awareness, can you have antennas up in a situation or in a day-to-day or in a communication loop, but also can you then later take a moment to reflect back on that situation and have some self-awareness as to, what body language you had, or what tonality you had, and what did you add or subtract? What did you contribute to or extract from that? Again, example being a communication dyad or loop. So having the ability to be self-aware, situationally aware, and then the ability to both come back later and assess that will go a really long way in helping to build your EQ, helping to enhance your EQ. So anything you can do, and that goes back, we have talked a lot in the past about journaling, self-reflection, that ability, self-assessment, that ability to take a step back and then jot something down or journal about a situation. But self-assessment is also not just about the past. Self-assessment is also about the future. In order for you to be successful, we talked before, a hope or a dream or some goal without a plan or strategy is really just a dream. And so putting a plan against it, writing it down, holding yourself accountable to it with kind of timelines and strategy and a plan is really important to be successful. And that's where kind of compounding interest comes in. We've talked about that in the past. So self-assessment is not just about self-assessment from kind of past events. It's also your ability to self-assess and then project yourself forward as to what maybe do you need to work on or improve upon or do, learn, exercise, whatever it might be, to then be successful and to move forward to achieve these goals that you've put out there or on paper with a strategy against it. So self-assessment really goes in both directions. The third habit is stress management. And, we've talked a lot about this as well. As you know, I'm a firm believer, you get out of your body what you put into it, that, what you eat matters, the positions you put your body into matters. So exercise really matters. Deep breathing and mindfulness really matters. So how you might calm the brain or really enhance your parasympathetic nervous system, because we run around all day just overly sympathetically toned, right? So our natural state at this point, not everyone has PTSD, but just the world around us and kind of the chaos and social media and all the distractions, humans these days live their lives with a little bit too much adrenaline, a little bit too much norepinephrine. And so anything we can do for stress management to help reduce the sympathetic tone and or enhance the parasympathetic tone. And I haven't talked a ton about that when I've talked about exercising or deep breathing exercises or mindfulness or cold plunges. But there are a number of things that can either help reduce sympathetic or enhance parasympathetic to try to reach a homeostasis and reestablish a balance. And again, those are the things we talk about, but we haven't really talked about it in the setting of the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. But all of those techniques, mindfulness, candidly, the self-awareness and kind of reflective thinking, exercises, deep breathing, again, cold showers, cold plunges, all of these things can enhance your stress management skills, can create more resilience. If you're one of the things you can do is use like an aura ring or a Whoop to look at heart rate variability. Heart rate variability, or HRV, is tied very closely into this idea of kind of your capability of handling stress. Are you sleeping well enough and kind of doing all the right things in a way that your body not only builds resilience, but actually has that kind of, has plenty in the bank, so to speak, so that as you hit stress that day, you're not, getting down to zero or in the red in your bank account, right? So kind of building up that resilience, having it on reserve, and therefore being able to manage through stress in a way that, you just weren't capable of before. And doing all of those things helps to enhance your EQ. It probably doesn't shock you that if you are in a constant state of stress and sympathetic overtone and a situation comes up, that you're likely to be more reactive and less proactive. You're likely to not think before you talk. You're more likely to do something you otherwise maybe shouldn't have done, or say something you otherwise shouldn't have said, if you're in a state of hyper reactivity or, again, overly sympathetically toned, as compared to one where you've built up resilience and built up kind of that stress bank account, or the anti-stress bank account, and are able to kind of manage through, dancing in traffic on a day-to-day. So building the resilience and having stress management skills and enhancing your parasympathetic systems go a long way in helping you to be a better leader, especially under pressure. So that would be a really great habit to make sure that you're introducing into your day-to-day life. We talked a little bit already about this, but empathy is, as we think about EQ, again, you have to be able to be self-aware, you have to be able to do self-assessment, and you have to be able to effectively communicate. But you also have to be able to effectively communicate in a way that is, in fact, empathetic. And so, if you are perceived as being a robot and you're doing a teach back or a talk back, and in that conversation, you say back all the things you heard, but you say them in a monotone and very robotically in such a way, or very kind of off-putting, then obviously, yes, you demonstrated you can reflectively listen, but you've not actually demonstrated the capability of empathy, right? So understanding empathy, honestly, the best way to kind of describe this, or the best exercise for me, has always been this idea of, no matter how thin you cut, just using this kind of term or this phrase or mantra, which is, no matter how thin you slice it, there's always three sides, right? So literally there's always something in a communication or in a story. There's always something that I probably do not know. In fact, I will say that differently. There is always something I do not know about a given situation or communication or conversation. And that is, do I know how, the other person on the other side of the communication woke up that day? Do I know what stress they're dealing with today? Do I know what physical or mental health issues they may be dealing with? Do I know every possible thing about the situation? Is it possible that I know every possible thing? And the answer to that will always be no, right? The answer, if you believe the answer to that is yes, and it's yes more than it is no, then you more than anyone need practice with empathy, which is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, right? So is it possible that I don't know everything? Is there possible there's other pieces to this puzzle? And just introducing the question will go a long way to helping you envision yourself in someone else's shoes, and then therein by have a much stronger EQ and be much better with interpersonal relationships and your leadership skills. So empathetic practice, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, can go a really long way in helping you to be more understanding, more empathetic, and again, just really lead by example with your team. The final habit we'll talk about today, as we think about how we might enhance EQ, is this idea of social skills. So again, in order to really demonstrate that you've enhanced your EQ, you can't do that in a vacuum, right? Or you can't do that with just one person. You have to be able to enhance your EQ as it relates to all your communication, even with an employee or a family member or a person who otherwise gives you kind of a negative reaction, right? So true mastery of EQ, or true enhancement of EQ, would be your capability to be self-aware and self-assess, your capability of be reflective, your capability of being empathetic and rapport building, your capability of doing all of these things in the setting or with individuals who may not be your usual folks, may not be your best friends, may not be your wife or your spouse. Being able to do that in a social situation is really where you are starting to get to mastery of how you can hone your EQ. And so networking events are important, or putting yourself out there, even if you're an introvert. Again, how do you derive energy from a group of people? One way could be through this kind of social skills building and enhanced EQ, but developing the capability to be connected, to be social, to be face-to-face, and to be able to do that with kind of all spectrums of individuals is really where you will note true gains in your ability to enhance your EQ. So thinking about how you can put yourself in the social situations, if those are things you avoid today, kind of be a yes person without taking that overboard, but getting in a group of people and being able to do all the things we just talked about with someone who may otherwise be a stranger. That's when you know that you're truly building upon your kind of foundational EQ. And that is, once again, a skill that will serve you very well, both personally and professionally, in your life. So those would be the key, or that would be another key habit to make sure that you're working on. Just to kind of go over those one more time, there's the reflective listening. There's the ability to be self-aware and self-assess. There's this building up of your anti-stress bank account and building resilience, and what techniques help to do that, including those that enhance your parasympathetic tone. There's the idea of communication can be reflective, but that doesn't mean it's rapport building or empathetic. So really working on the put yourself in their shoes, always other pieces of information you don't know, always other sides of the story, that kind of mindset, that kind of question asking. And then finally, not just being able to do this with one person or the most common people, but being able to do this with a group of people or frankly strangers, is what ultimately helps to get you to that next level of kind of refining and enhancing in maturing your emotional intelligence. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, or share this episode. Once again, I'm Dr. Ryan Wakeham, successful entrepreneur and your endgame coach. I'm here to teach you how to exist today so that you may expand tomorrow and create the ultimate endgame of your wildest desires. Talk to you soon.